Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, as the case may be, and welcome to Pipeline's KnowledgeCast webinar, The Business Case for Policy and Charging Controls, featuring Cisco and OpenNet. I'm Tim Young, Editor-in-Chief of Pipeline, and I'm your moderator today. We just need to go over a few quick items before we get started. Today we'll hear from our presenters, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. To participate in the Q&A portion of today's webinar, all you'll have to do is type in your question into the Ask a Question text area below the presentation window and then click the Submit button. You may submit the questions at any time during the webcast, and we'll address as many questions as the time permits as our presenters, after our presenters' prepared remarks. If you happen to experience any technical problems, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the Help link in your console. Now with that, we'll get started. Today we're pleased to have with us Cameron Dunn, Telecoms Technologist for OpenNet. Also Dennis Fiore, the Manager, Product Management at Cisco Systems, and our very own Ed Feingold, our Associate Publisher here at Pipeline. And we'll get started with Ed. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Tim, and hello everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about the wireless industry today, which is obviously probably the hottest sector in the telecom industry right now, obviously getting a lot of mainstream media attention and experiencing a lot of change and a lot of innovation, and that obviously brings us to the point here, which is talking about whether or not billing is keeping up with it, and looking at some solutions, specifically policy and charging controls and how they can play a role in helping to innovate business models in the wireless industry. So one of the issues that we're seeing right now is that despite the success the wireless operators are having, they're leaving some money on the table, and growth is obviously critical to any business and its health. And where we're seeing some key metrics that we'll get to, things like voice ARPU starting to decline, even though we're seeing data subscriptions grow, more growth needs to come from somewhere, and so there is money being left on the table that can be addressed, both in terms of revenue and in terms of cost. One of the big cost areas, obviously, is billing and flexibility. It tends to upset customers. Customers get confused, and that can drive a lot of bill servicing costs, especially in the contact center. And it also is costing some on the revenue side, because over-the-top models are really skirting the wireless revenue stream, and companies that can be great potential partners and actually are on the handset side, the equipment manufacturers, are going to their own over-the-top models for content with things like app stores, and that's a lot of that's due to the billing infrastructure, and then that needs to be addressed. One of the other areas where wireless carriers are being hit with some cost is in uncontrolled demand for data, and that's creating network performance issues. And what we mean by uncontrolled demand, it's not just unlimited plans, but the fact that plans are set up today in a way that doesn't really encourage any specific type of behavior, good or bad. It doesn't drive things that maybe work best for the network, and that's something that Cameron will get into a bit later. But it's an issue, and it's costing wireless carriers in the U.S., I can tell you, on the PR side especially, when they start to have network performance issues, especially as new smartphones come into the picture. And then, as I mentioned, voice ARPU is declining. We're seeing that consistently in the quarterly reports. And at the same time, contact center costs are rising, both because customers obviously have questions about a lot of new services, but especially, and I've seen numbers saying that 70% or more of the calls to contact centers have to do with the bill, have to do with billing confusion. So those are all areas where we could probably find some improvement and where money is being left on the table. So the unfortunate thing is that a lot of carriers are falling back on an old model of penalty-based pricing, and they're starting to take away services, which I'll talk about in a moment, without offering value in return. And that model just doesn't make sense. We want to keep customers. We want to make them happy. We want to encourage them to build their relationship with us as carriers. And if we're penalizing them for using too much, that model just seems to be inside out in the world that we're in now. And so I think it's really time for new models to come into the market that emphasize rewards for customers rather than penalties, really rewarding customers both for building a relationship and for behaving in ways on the network that we really want them to behave. And so one of the things we'll get to today is how policy-based charging or policy and charging controls really can enable new business models and can also make things easier for partners as they want to connect with the wireless billing infrastructure. So some of the challenges on that note, the legacy infrastructure really is encouraging over-the-top plays rather than good partnerships. And one of the things that comes into focus there is short code billing. That's where, you would send a, let's say, 5-digit code via text, or send a message via a 5-digit code via text, and that's going to trigger a download or a content subscription or something to that effect. And right now, it's sort of the only game in town for third-party pass-through billing that wireless carriers offer, and it's just not flexible enough for the kinds of new content and new subscription models that the third-party innovators really want to bring to the table. And so what that's doing, because of that limitation, is that it's encouraged folks like the equipment manufacturers to go to their own over-the-top content models. And so that's where we really have a big disconnect. Another thing, obviously, like we said, we're still seeing penalty models. And those penalty models drive churn, which obviously drives cost, and they drive contact center costs through the roof because it results in things like bill shock and in people having a sense that they don't have control over their bill, they don't have control over their costs, maybe they don't even have control over their usage. And all those things translate into big costs and customer dissatisfaction. And again, all those things need to be addressed. Those are the challenges. So one of the reactions we're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, is trying to take some things away from the customer. In the U.S., we're seeing operators, and there's been a lot of talk about this in the press, we're seeing operators trying to stuff the unlimited genie back into the bottle. In other words, we went to this unlimited model, unlimited data in particular. That's really where the biggest problem is. It's kind of lined up with how the internet works. People are used to getting lots of stuff, being able to use as much as they want and get lots of stuff for free. Carriers kind of followed this model, and now they're seeing some issues because of it, especially on the network, and now they want to take it away. So the operator is taking that away but not giving anything back. And what happens in that relationship is that even if the change in the pricing model is fair, customers become very suspicious. They still feel like they don't have enough control, they don't have enough choice, they don't really have enough say in their relationship with the operator. And so even if the pricing model that comes forward is very fair, customers are very suspicious that maybe they're paying for things that they don't really use, or that something's being taken away from them, like unlimited, but they're not really getting anything back while they're spending maybe the same money. And so it just sours the relationship, even if the numbers aren't actually any different. And sometimes the numbers are different. And so what I'm suggesting is it's really time that we offer customers tailored offerings, that we give them rewards for having a good relationship with us as a carrier, and that we also provide cost visibility. Because if we can give cost visibility, we can give a sense of control. We give people a feeling that they want to build a relationship and that there's a lot of trust in that relationship. So what the doubters tend to say is that this is all too complicated, that some of these new approaches make bills tougher to service, that changing bills or changing models is just going to upset customers. And we do see that sometimes with contact center volume rising, like when a bill format changes. But I'll tell you what, these are already problems that the wireless industry is facing now. So it's really not a reason to stop us from innovating and from advancing and trying to do things better. Is billing complex? Sure, it always is. But one of the things we definitely need to do is make it easier for partners to interface with that complexity and build a better ecosystem, build a better revenue model so we're not driving folks to do over-the-top plays and go around the infrastructure. Is it tough to service bills? Sure, it's tough to service bills now, but a lot of that is because folks are upset that they have no sense of control, not enough visibility, not enough detail on the bill. And so that's something that we can address to the positive. And then finally, is there disappointment? Are customers disappointed? Well, when customers don't get what they want for a price that they understand, that's when they become disappointed. We've seen this growth in smartphones. Customers want more stuff. They want more exciting things. They want a more exciting device in their pocket. Where they're going to get upset is when they feel like things are being taken away from them or they don't have control over what they're spending and what they're getting for that money. So what's the next step here? Well, one of the big things is changing the compensation structure. And I realize this is a lot to bite off, but we need to change the compensation structure so we're not just focused on acquisition. We're not just focused on paying folks that interact with customers commissions for upselling. We need to focus on happy and rewarded customers and having compensation structures that drive that rather than pure upsells. We shouldn't be selling people things when they have a problem. That's just a basic that makes sense, but it's what we see today. And to drive that, we really need management that's focused on customer relationships rather than old metrics. So instead of just ARPU, instead of just gross ads, net ads, things like that, we need to find a way, and we have the analytical tools to do it, to measure the positivity in customer relationships, to measure loyalty and things like that, and reward folks for it. And then finally, to make these new business models come forward, we need capabilities like PCC that are going to enable the most effective business models that we find and be very flexible. Just in the way we wanted to move to rating engines that could build for anything, we need to move to overall solutions that can support any kind of business model that makes a whole lot of sense. So where I'm going to go now is I'm going to hand off to Dennis Fiore from Cisco Systems, and he's going to talk about the PCC solution that Cisco and OpenNet have delivered together that can enable some of these business models. Dennis.
Thank you, Ed. So one of the things Cisco and OpenNet have been doing is delivering this policy solution in the market. So OpenNet and Cisco have been working for many years delivering this. Cisco as an access gateway into an enforcement function of a policy architecture, and OpenNet as the policy control and the charging. So on this slide, it shows one of the key mobile internet market trends that we all see, right? If you go from the right-hand corner down, more mobile devices, we all see that trend. Smartphones used to be a very small percentage of new phones, and now they are 30 to 40% of the new phones that are being purchased. And of course, we all know that that drives tremendous data growth. So that centerpiece is the huge increase in mobile traffic and the need to be able to control these things and at least monetize them. So one of the key themes here is how does an operator monetize all these new applications. So on the bottom right there, the rich media content, everyone wants to use their phone and on a day-to-day basis access the internet. One of the other key trends is that we see is how there's a lot of users in the developing world and Eastern Europe and places like that are using their mobile access for surfing the web. They don't have the broadband connection. So all this traffic, the growth in the smartphones, the usage that they drive is creating a huge internet market, and the operators need to figure out how to monetize all these new applications. What we found is that one of the key things is that the end user is actually willing to pay for, using better devices, getting better quality of service, in this personalization that I show in the left-hand corner, that something might be very important to you as a user and you want to get, the top-of-the-line quality of service so that you get newscasting or whatever it is that you want that's important to you, and that you're willing to pay a monthly fee to be able to do that personalization, to be able to have the service bundles that you would like to see. So this whole trend is driving a great opportunity for network operators to improve the end user experience and then deliver some monetization around that. One of the key advantages that an operator has is the intelligence in the network. So we all see the other trends of over-the-top, whether it's Google Talk or just other applications that people are using on their iPhones and things of that nature. One of the key things that the operators have is, well, they own the network and they have intelligent devices, and they can look at these other types of overlays, if you will, location awareness. So depending on where you are, if you're roaming, then you don't want to get extreme high bills that would end up happening. So being able to detect that you're roaming or based on what location you're at, and then change the service model with a policy and control architecture. Usage visibility. Some of the users want to actually get a feel of where they are in their rate plans. Am I exceeding? Am I in the middle? Session awareness, multiple sessions and being able to, exceed the capacity of the network. And then access technology and device, what device am I accessing this application from? Obviously, doing it from a smartphone versus, a more traditional mobile phone, things would be very different. And having an architecture that allows you to detect these things and then intelligently, integrate the network intelligence with the policy and control architecture solution that we deliver, and being able to make the right decisions for the end user. And of course, one of the key things we see in the market today is all the different rate plans, and there's been a lot of activity lately around that, where some of the operators are revamping the way they've done some of the rate plans. So they really want to drive usage. You want to actually make it so that the end user wants to use the network more, but the operator has the dilemma of, if they drive too much traffic, then there's a disconnect between the investment that they have to make to build out that network that can provide all that bandwidth and all those applications, with the amount of money that an end user is willing to pay. So you can see that some of the rate plan adjustments that they've made is really, they're at that point now where they want to start driving traffic to the market. This next slide was from a heavy reading survey of their installed base. So if you are trying to do monetization, how important is policy control? And you can see that 96%, it's either essential or important. So this is a key enabler. So having a policy control architecture and a solution deployed in the network allows the operator to monetize these new services that we just talked about, whether it's doing video via YouTube or whatever. There are new applications that are coming out on a daily basis, and the operator really needs to monetize that to increase the average revenue per user, but they have to deliver a service. So they have to provide better quality service, a better end user experience, and that's what the policy control allows them to do. So the time is now. The operators are all saying, this is important. So why would you do policy and control? It has significant benefits around managing the network and the traffic that we talked about, in monetizing those applications, being able to intelligently detect what the user is doing, what applications they're using, and then monetizing appropriately by creating service bundles and delivering a value-added service to them. This allows the operator to increase their customer base. Again, with those personalized services, whether it's parental controls so that you make sure that your children aren't doing things that they shouldn't be on a smartphone, because we all know that we don't get to see everything that they're doing. So those type of services that the operator can now apply to the end user with some small incremental revenue to drive monetization of these applications, as well as creating new applications. So the policy and control is really the key enabler of being able to deliver monetization to the operator. We all see the multiple service packages and things of that nature. So the flexible charging. So the other part of the policy and control is also the charging. So being able to differentiate between on-net and off-net services, being able to differentiate between an application that is very bandwidth hungry, if you will, and then charging appropriately. So that allows the operator to to align the revenue that they collect with the cost associated with delivering that service. So the operator has to deliver this network management, and there's many strategies that the operator can do. So I'm just going to highlight, this slide has the ones that OpenNet and Cisco have been working on. And one of the key ones here is dynamically applying various filter criteria. So the intelligence in the network, you can actually detect that there's congestion in the network. You can look at the location and see that the person is at an airport, at a campus, or whatever, and that there's a lot of users in a small location, and therefore, depending on who that user is and what personalization they have asked for, you can deliver the proper charging methods and the proper quality service. and manage their credit. It could be a prepaid service where you let them know that they're using so much dollars or euros, and they're about to run out, and then redirecting them to a service that then says, what do you want to do, and they can top off and increase their allocation. Roaming and location is really important right now. Operators with their roaming agreements, with the explosion of all these smartphones and the applications that they can do, it actually became a cost to them. It wasn't a revenue leakage; it was a cost explosion. So they had to be able to detect that the user is roaming, and therefore do some kind of control and limits onto the amount of data that they could consume. Otherwise, you would have an unhappy customer because they would get all these additional overage charges, and you'd have an operator that is having additional cost associated with that. So the second part of the slide is doing things dynamically. So some of these, policy control has been around for quite some time, but it's more of when you attach to the network, the operator would say, oh, this is a gold user, or I understand what this user is, and then they would just set these attributes up once. What a policy architecture allows you to do is dynamically do that based on what's going on in the network, congestion control, and things of that nature, and again, the location of that person. Are they a tiered subscriber? In the middle of the slide there, detect and control the usage. Tiering subscribers, a gold, silver, bronze type of monetization, and the service bundles. So you'll see some of the pricing models that are changing, and being able to provide the end user with more choices. So flexibility and more choices, as opposed to, okay, I have one data plan and it's X dollars a month and it's all you can eat. The end user wants more choices and more flexibility than that down at the service and application level. These last couple of bullets there, access the network and roaming. So the other trend is detecting how the person has actually accessed the network. Is this on a Wi-Fi hotspot? Is this on a 2G network, a 3G, or what's coming around the corner, a 4G? And then you can make your policy decisions based on that. How much bandwidth I have, what kind of device they're using, what application they're running, right down to what time of day it is. If it's during the busy hour, or if it's later at night. So the monetization strategies. Looking from the right-hand side, the mobile cloud is definitely one of the things that's happening. We all see that, over-the-top type applications. And you see now a significant amount of collaboration between the operators and those over-the-top type services. And that allows them to monetize. So, Apple was first with AT&T in that relationship, and we've all seen how that drives additional revenue into AT&T, that they get a royalty payment with each application that gets used. And then the premium video. Video just is one of those applications that is taking off, and there really is no end as to how much growth we're going to see on that application. So then delivering the new services. Rich Communication Suite is a new initiative that has started, and that's to deliver, the way I like to look at it is a common network address book, so that you don't have your address book at work, you have your address book on whichever service you use at home, then you have your instant messaging address book and things like that. So the phones themselves, those smartphones, are coming out with clients that will then use a common network address book to deliver instant messaging and presence, so that the users all see the same experience and they have one address book. So here's another opportunity for a service provider to deliver a service that we all know and have been using, but we tend to go over the top. And for them to now embed that in the phone, make it easy to use, and then with the policy control, easy to monetize from their perspective. And lastly, you have to be able to monitor and protect the network to a certain degree. create fairness. So that was one of the key things that OpenNet and Cisco have been working on, fair usage type control mechanisms in place so that the 80-20 rule does not apply, so that everyone gets a fair allocation of bandwidth and a fair allocation of applications so that they get a reasonable user experience. So whether you're doing it on a tiered pricing or you're doing it detecting that this is a corporate user and that they're actually located at work because you can see their location, and therefore they have profile corporate versus profile personal. So that's, again, the personalization. Okay, now I'm going to pass it over to Cameron from OpenNet, where he's going to describe a little more on the policy and control architecture and then go into some of the use cases that operators are delivering in the network today with the Cisco OpenNet solution.
Thank you, Dennis. Hello, everybody. My name is Cameron, and I'm here today to talk to you briefly, first of all, about the PCC architecture and how it operates. And then I'm going to spend the remainder of my part of this webinar talking to you about some of the business problems that PCC-based solutions can solve. So on this first slide here, I'm presenting a very simplified overview of the PCC architecture as defined by the 3GPP. The main components of it are highlighted on your screen in green, and I'm going to describe each of these very briefly. On the top of your screen, you've got the subscription profile repository, and this is responsible for storing the static information about the users. So typically this is stuff like names, addresses, and the type of subscription plan they're on, such as Gold, Silver, or Bronze. Beneath that we have the policy charging rules function, PCRF, and this is responsible for taking a variety of inputs at any given time and determining what PCC rules should be applied for those inputs. To the right of that we have the online charging system, and this is responsible for maintaining all the users' balances. So typically these would be things like the amount of credit remaining, which will decrement until ultimately the user tops up again, or alternatively the amount of megabytes of data spent this month, which will keep incrementing until we reach the end of the month. Finally, on the bottom of the screen you can see the policy and charging enforcement function, or the PCEF. So this acts as a gateway between the network where the user's mobile device is and the broader internet in general. And for the purposes of my section of the webinar today, I'm assuming that the PCEF contains some sort of a deep packet inspection component. Okay, so in this next slide I'm showing you now a very simplified message flow that occurs when the user tries to interact with some sort of a web service using his mobile device. So what happens is, in step one, the user's mobile device sends some sort of a HTTP request, and this is intercepted by the PCEF. The PCEF will then query the PCOF to determine if this data should be allowed to continue. The PCOF may consult with both the SPR and the OCS in order to reach a decision. And finally, this decision will be communicated back to the PCEF. In this example then, the PCEF will allow the data to flow through to the network. So that's all I want to say about the architecture and the operation of PCC-based solutions. And I'm going to spend the remainder of this webinar now talking about the business problems that they address. Okay, so for the first business model I'm going to talk about is what I call the resource management problem. The problem here is that it's no longer commercially viable for the telcos to keep increasing their network capabilities, keep matching the demand for data services. There's two reasons for this. First of all, it requires significant infrastructural investment, and there's no return for it. And secondly, it's not always possible to keep upgrading the network, for example, in the radio access network. The second problem that network operators are seeing at the moment is that they're experiencing severe data congestion in urban areas during peak hours of the day. Indeed, I read an FCC report last week that had some very interesting statistics in it. One of them was that in the United States, the top 1% of users currently generate 25% of all data, And if we extend that statistic to the top 10% of users, we find that they generate 70% of all data. So that's quite amazing statistic. And indeed, I believe that this trend is likely to continue even further as applications such as Apple's FaceTime become more and more popular. So, what is it that the telcos have done to try and address this problem to date? Well, what they've mainly focused on doing is punishing bad behavior. They've normally gone about this in one of two ways. Firstly, they will degrade the service of the user once he has passed above a certain threshold. And secondly, they typically charge users extra once they go above the same threshold. And the problem with this is that even though it affects a very small percentage of users, it does have an incredibly negative perception in the marketplace. And indeed, it often receives media attention. So what's the solution that I'm proposing here? Well, I'm proposing that instead, telcos need to consider rewarding users for good behavior. And the advantage of this is it makes the subscriber feel better. I mean, everybody loves a sort of a win-win situation where they're getting something. Indeed, we've seen a similar situation here in this country in relation to the energy creation market, where the energy companies reward their top users for using energy in the way that they want. So, how exactly would the telcos go about rewarding the users? Well, the first thing is the telco needs to understand how the resources are being used within their network and where the constraints are occurring. Once they understand this, it's then possible to define a constraint that the user can easily understand. So, for example, the telco might have a policy where they encourage users to avoid using video during the peak hours of the day. Or alternatively, they may try and encourage users to stay well below their monthly threshold. So the thing the telcos need to do next then is define a reward for these users who stay below their constraint. So what sort of rewards might they offer? Well, the first type of reward they could offer maybe is free video for users who avoid watching video during the peak hours of the day. So a typical example of this might be, for example, 30 minutes of Hulu in the evening. Alternatively, they could reward users by offering them a discount on their following month's subscription. So the second business problem we're going to discuss today is what I refer to as broadening the revenue base. So the problem here is that telcos are being marginalized by over-the-top players. And the reason they're being marginalized is because in the past the telcos have not been able to react quick enough to the demands of both the over-the-top players and indeed the consumers. So what we've seen is there's been a strong emergence of third-party billing. And generally this occurs in one of two ways. It can either be directly by the application provider. So for example, Skype bills users directly for credit that they buy and consume. Or indeed, the users can be billed by application stores, such as the Google Marketplace that's created by Google. However, although these work, the problem is users in general prefer a one-stop billing solution where all of their billing needs are met by one supplier. Indeed, I read in a recent article in Pipeline a quote from Nokia that was saying that in markets where they move users from credit card billing to operator billing, they see an immediate 70% increase in sales. That's pretty significant. So what is the solution that I'm proposing here? Well, I think first of all, telcos need to broaden the partner base, and they need to consider partners that previously they would not have considered. Secondly, they need to develop flexible partnerships with these partners. And lastly, they need to be very dynamic and to be able to react much quicker to both the needs of partners and users. So the next two slides here, I provide some very simple examples of how telcos can implement some of this. So in this first slide here, you can see on the left-hand side, I've defined two types of users. The first is an individual subscriber who has a voice plan but no data plan, and she pays for data per kilobyte. So in general, this type of user will be quite afraid of using data services and not really understand what they're about. The second type of user is using an iPad. And this is quite an interesting device because it doesn't require the user to permanently have a data connection. So the user can be at home using the iPad on the Wi-Fi network quite happily for 29 days of the month. But then, when she goes away for that long weekend, she can buy 48 hours worth of access. In the center of this slide, I outline some of the resources that the user is going to access, the context in which she's going to access them, and the cost rules that she perceives. So if we consider, for example, the top one, Amazon.com, what I'm proposing here is that the user can access Amazon.com using a mobile device for free. So this can occur either because she's accessing the mobile version of Amazon.com's website, or indeed it can be using some sort of mobile app on the marketplace for her device. So, if the user is not paying for the service, then who's paying the telco for it? Well, in this case, Amazon is going to pay for the service. The question there really is, why would Amazon want to pay for this? Well, I think that partners such as Amazon are likely to want to pay for it because, for the same reason, that they're quite happy to pay for free phone numbers in the voice world. So I think this example is quite a natural extension of the free phone number. And to take another example from this slide, if you look at Sky Sports, this is an example of where the telco is partnering with a content distributor. In this case, what's happening is the user is able to access Sky Sports for free, but Sky Sports is ultimately going to pay the telco for the service, and Sky Sports will redeem that cost from the user as part of her annual subscription. Indeed, this example could even be extended by having the telco consider content producers such as FIFA and NFL instead of content distributors. So on this slide here, I'm showing some similar examples to the previous slide, but in this case, they're in the context of a business user. Now, this business user has a mobile device and pays a flat rate per month for a certain amount of data transfer, in the example 500 gigabytes. However, this allowance of 500 gigabytes is only allowed against recognized or approved corporate applications. If the user tries to access a non-approved application, then she must pay for this directly herself. This example is quite interesting because you have the one mobile device, but yet depending on the data that's being accessed, it'll either be discounted against the monthly data allowance, or the user, using a separate account, pays for it directly herself. And so you can see, to pick some of the examples on this slide, if the user is accessing Google apps, well then that will be discounted from her monthly allowance, and the corporation pays the telco. Whereas if the user accesses YouTube, then she must pay for that herself directly. Okay, so in my last business model, I'm going to discuss what I refer to as personalized pricing. Now the problem here is that the existing plans we've seen to date are too restrictive, as indeed previous speakers have mentioned. And what we're seeing more and more is that the one size does not fit all users. And this is problematic for many different reasons, but I've highlighted two of these here. Firstly, it's quite difficult to get users to move from having a voice-only plan to suddenly having a voice and data plan, because typically there'll be an extra charge of something like €20 or $20 per month. Secondly, at the moment, data plans tend to be specified in very technical terms, such as bandwidth, latency, quality of service, etc. And in general, the average user doesn't understand these, and nor does she really care about them either. So what is the solution I'm proposing here? Well, I think what telcos need to do is they need to consider much better segmentation within their market. They need to enable users to have choice, and they need to enable the users to pay for only the things that particularly interest users, and not for the things that don't interest them. A key aspect of all this is online selling, and this is where the telco enables the user in real time, without any human intervention, to upsell and buy more services. And lastly, in relation to this, it's very important that if the telcos are going to start bringing in sophisticated pricing plans like this, then they must have well-developed self-care solutions that the users can easily understand and manage themselves. So on this slide here, I'm presenting some very simple examples of potential personalized pricing plans. I've grouped these together in columns by the type of plans that they are. And I'll talk about a few of these very briefly. So, for example, on the left-hand side, I've got what I call the starter bundle. And these are really designed to sort of entice users to move from the voice-only world to having voice and data plans. So the first of these is the single application plan. So the idea behind this is that for a very small nominal charge, such as €5 or $5 per month, use a kind of unlimited access to their favorite application. So, for example, typical contenders for this would be Facebook, Twitter, or whatever the local newspaper happens to be. So the idea of this is you get the user to start using data services, and then once they get comfortable with that, you will hopefully upsell to them. The next column contains what I call the traditional bundles, and we're all familiar with those, so I won't discuss those. And to take a final example, we look at the lifestyle bundle column, and I'll just briefly talk about the child bundle. So the idea of this is that a child who has this subscription bundle is able to access the internet using a mobile device. However, she can only do this if it's the weekday and outside of school hours, or indeed if it's the weekend. Furthermore, she's not able to access any sites that are deemed to contain adult content. And it's also possible for her to share her monthly data allowance with her siblings. Finally, this bundle could potentially have a login facility whereby parents could log on to some portal and they could see all of the websites to access by the child during the last 30 days. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm now going to hand you back over to Ed.
Thanks very much, Cameron. So let's talk a little bit, coming out of Cameron's proposals of the kind of business models that we can enable. Let's talk a little bit about what we see today in the market. And so this is a chart that I put together as part of what I do in my day job when I'm not associate publisher for Pipeline and I'm chief analytics officer for Valados. What you're looking at here is a mapping. Those red lines represent where the plan tiers among the 5 major U.S. wireless carriers, where their plan tiers are. In other words, the allotments you get as part of your voice minute plan. And the blue columns that you see are representative of the distribution curve, which shows you how individuals actually consume plan minutes. Plan minutes being those minutes that count against your allotment. So things like nights and weekends, mobile-to-mobile, A-list, friends and family, if those sorts of things are free, they're not included here. We're just looking at the plan minutes that count against the allotment. And the bottom line that you see here is there's a big disconnect. The tiers really don't represent usage. There isn't a lot of personalization. There's not a lot of tailoring here. So from coming out of a lot of what Cameron was saying, we need to see a shift here. We've got a very old model for pricing and subscription structures that doesn't really represent what people are really doing with their devices. And I would argue that this is a big part of the reason that people tend to get upset and feel like they don't have a lot of control over their service, they don't have a lot of personalization, obviously, and that sort of thing. So what I'm suggesting we move, and this is a little crazy to look at, but what I'm suggesting we do is move to something that's a little more personalized, where folks have more options, and where we do away with things like hard caps. So instead of having a very static model, we have something that's a bit more flexible. So no hard caps. With something like PCC, we can give folks a buy-up alert so that they can avoid overage. In other words, if they're burning through their whole allotment, we can say, hey, you can buy up, and if you do buy up, let's give you a reward for that. But at the same time, really the bigger problem than overage is oversubscription. In general, where folks are buying a lot more service than they actually use, a lot of times because they fear overage. And this creates, again, that sense of no control, or that you're not getting a fair deal, or you're not getting your money's worth. And so what I'm suggesting here is that we also start to give oversubscription forgiveness. We see some of that today in the U.S. With rollover minutes, although that's kind of a quick and dirty way to do it, I would argue. But the idea of oversubscription forgiveness and also giving people alerts before they come into overage, again, you're giving people control, you're giving them visibility. We can start to move the overall model in a positive direction. And again, this doesn't just apply to plan minutes as I'm showing here, which is an easy way to present it, but it applies to any type of service. So let's move on here. Let's talk about some of the value that we're seeing some providers add successfully that moves in the direction that Cameron was talking about. The relationship between Verizon Wireless and Skype is a really positive one. Verizon Wireless supports Skype on its smartphones now. You can get a free Skype app. And then all Skype-to-Skype calls are considered in-network calls. In other words, they don't count against either a minute allotment, nor do they count against a data plan allotment, if you have one, if you're not on unlimited. And even if it is on unlimited, obviously, you're obviously not being counted against. The point being, though, you have to have a data plan in order to get access to this, but you're getting some added value as Verizon Wireless starts to build out relationships like this. Skype being a very powerful one. You can make calls all over the world. You can access that whole community. It's hundreds of millions of users. There's a lot of value to add there. And when we talked to Jennifer Byrne, we at Pipeline talked to Jennifer Byrne, who's one of the business developers that was at the center of developing this relationship for Verizon Wireless. I thought she made a good point when she said that, quote, I think a lot of customers aren't clear as to why they need a data plan, and this, Skype, is something very tangible. And I think that's a good point where, we in the industry can get caught up in things like, hey, let's give someone an allotment of megabytes. The average person may not understand what that means. As we add more value, like Verizon Wireless has done here, you start to give people an understanding of what they can do with the data subscription and what's included in it beyond the megabyte. So another good example, and this ties into one of the specific examples that Cameron provided, is something that Amazon's doing with its Kindle. The Kindle's obviously been a very successful device, and yeah, I know there's been a lot of back and forth about the iPad sort of making the Kindle less important. Let's not get stuck on that. Kindle's been real successful for Amazon, and one of the things with the new Kindle is that it provides what they're calling free 3G wireless. Now, it's not complete, wide open 3G wireless access, but what happens here is that Amazon pays on behalf of the Kindle owner, pays for the 3G wireless connectivity that it will get, and then that gives the Kindle mobility, and anywhere you go, you can use that 3G wireless connection to download digital content from the Kindle store that's specific to that device. And so this is just a good example that we're seeing already that has success in the market, where we have a provider-sponsored connectivity service, so to speak, that then lets someone access content. And I think from a model, from a business model perspective, now we're not even talking about a megabit allotment. We're not talking about the infrastructure service per se. We're talking about, hey, here's all the great things that you can get for this device, and the connectivity is just inherent in getting that device. And I'm starting to see that in other areas as well. And I think that's a powerful concept. Well, here's another one. And this is coming out of the cable world in the U.S. A company called Cablevision, one of the big cable operators in the U.S., very big cable operator in the New York, New Jersey area, so obviously one of the most densely populated parts of the country. And what they've done is, with their Optimum Wi-Fi service, they've put a lot of Wi-Fi connectivity up in a lot of public areas, like it says here, shopping centers, main streets, trains and train platforms, all kinds of places where people will congregate or commute through, all those sorts of things. And so if you're an Optimum customer, meaning you have a cable modem service or a home broadband service, you can use your ID, your Optimum ID, and your password. And whether that's with a laptop or a cell phone or a smartphone, any of those Wi-Fi capable devices, you can then go ahead and leverage that home subscription you have to access in a mobile and remote, on-the-go way, this Wi-Fi network. So I'd say there's two things going on here. One is you're adding a lot of value to that core subscription by adding that mobility factor. But two, I think what this says to mobile operators is, hey, there are other options for mobility coming on. And as you start to cap people's usage, they're going to start looking at these kinds of things more. So we need to be aware of what's happening and look at something like this offering that Cablevision has, either as a real strong competitor or as a potential partner for ways that we can, again, extend the value of what we're providing in the context of that data subscription or any service subscription. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Tim Young, and he's going to lead our Q&A, and we can start to wrap things up. Tim?
Thanks very much, Ed. So at this point, we want to turn to some of the questions that have been submitted from the audience. If you still have a burning question that you'd like to submit, feel free to do so, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So this first question is for Ed, going back to some of the comments that you've made. Do you propose that carriers eliminate all overage charges and penalties like late payment fees?
So I don't think it's realistic to eliminate all of that, and Cameron spoke to this a little bit as well. I think the model is flawed from an overage perspective, especially when you look at the price. When overage minutes or megabytes or text messages even, can be 5 to 10 times the cost per unit as what you're otherwise paying, like within your plan. And so I think just having an excessive penalty model like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There is something to be said, however, for putting some controls in place from a pricing perspective to prevent abuse in the network. So if we see things like, for example, tethering users, when I've looked at the numbers behind this, tethering users tend to be big abusers of the network. And tethering is when you essentially use your cell phone as a wireless modem, right? They tend to have extreme data usage. They'll tap into an unlimited plan and really go crazy. And if you do the numbers on it, they'll get their cost per megabit down to 2/1000ths of a cent or something ridiculous like that. And so to put something in place that'll help rein in some of those things that tend to abuse the network and actually affect the whole community, I think is important. Things like late payment fees, I think at the end of the day, it's probably not worth it to fight the battle with the finance guys right off the top to attack something like that. I think it has to be what can you control, and it comes back to, hey, how do we put models in place that don't just penalize but really reward, and let's focus on getting some of those rewards into the picture.
Okay. Great. Here's a question for Cameron, and perhaps Dennis may want to chime in as well. What's the most interesting PCC use case that you've seen in the deployed environment?
Okay, good question, Tim. I think probably one of the ones that we've seen here that's quite popular sort of as a starting one is one to sort of address the problem of credit expiring. So typically what's happened in the past was if you were a prepaid customer and you're browsing away and you're surfing the internet or whatever and your credit is going down, and when your credit reached zero and had expired, you sort of generally got cut off, and that was the end of the story. You sort of had to go and either go back to your PC and buy credit online or go to your local store or whatever. So I think what we're seeing here that PCC can be used, how PCC can be used to solve that is, first of all, you can have a situation that when the user's credit does expire, in real time they can get a page inserted into their normal flow telling them, hey, your credit has just expired and do you want to purchase more right here now online? And in that case, the user can put in their credit card details and they can buy more credit. And that works very well because it's very effective upselling, and you are definitely getting revenue right there and then that previously sort of the user had to go off and go to the shop or go to the PC and maybe they forget about it. As an interesting addition to that, what we've seen some operators doing then is when a user gets sort of below a certain threshold and their credit has nearly expired, they might get some sort of warning. So typically it might be something like, again, a page is inserted into the normal flow, or indeed they may get a warning via text message. But I think that example is quite nice. It's probably quite a good sort of starting one to get onto. It's a nice sort of, it's a nice use case for PCC, and it's certainly been quite popular.
Great. Okay, here's a question for all of the panelists, and you can chime in as you'd like. If the FCC regulates the internet, how it will impact the current traffic management pricing and practices. How will this affect your current recommendations? Would anyone like to tackle that directly?
I think that's a tough question, Tim. It's a very good question, but whether the FCC will regulate the internet is a big if, and obviously this is kind of a U.S.-centric question. How will it affect current traffic management pricing and practices? I mean, it really depends on what the extent of that regulation is. So I don't mean to give a non-answer, but I think it's very difficult to predict the future in this area because the FCC, in my experience, especially, I've been a regulatory reporter in the past. They tend to be a little bit unpredictable. But if we look at the hands-off kind of laissez-faire approach we have now, I'd be very surprised if regulation came into the picture where they're really going to clamp down tightly, like in the old voice world way, on how pricing is done for data traffic or for content. I think it more becomes an issue that we've seen of, can we have premium content? Can there be a parallel channel for large partnerships, let's say like Verizon Wireless and Google, to deliver premium content that gets premium treatment? I think that's probably the issue at hand now. And what I'd say is that, if that's allowed, and in my opinion, to some extent it makes sense to allow that sort of thing, as long as we're not doing away with the sort of free egalitarian part of the internet, I think it just makes things like PCC that much more important, that much more needed, because you're going to need to have a lot of tight controls to enable that sort of an environment and enable the kind of business models we've been talking about.
Yeah, I'll go indirectly answering that question as well. It's probably not what the person who asked the question meant, but certainly here in the EU, we've seen recently 2 lots of regulation that have been imposed upon us by the Commission. And in both of these cases, PCC has actually been part of the solution that's enabled telcos to comply with this regulation. So the first one would be where we've seen regulation coming in relating to protecting children from accessing adult content online, and that's certainly something that PCC can help to solve. And the second thing we've seen come in, even just 2 months ago, relates to users roaming within the EU and facing massive bills for data services without them realizing it. And this is something where, again, PCC enables the telcos to deploy solutions that basically prevent this sort of bill shock happening when users go roaming.
All right.
Hi, and this is Dennis from Cisco. So that was an excellent point. And the other thing, my observation on this has been that the key thing that they're really concerned about, which was happening, which was, singling out applications and then treating them unfairly, where the operator would rate limit down, BitTorrent because it's a bandwidth-hungry application. So clearly, those type of things will probably not be allowed. The FCC will, in fact, say you have to have a certain level of neutrality. But a lot of what we've talked about today is around applications, operators partnering with those application providers, like the Skype working with Verizon. Those things, I think, there's no way they're going to disallow those type of things where you're going to build a service and charge appropriately for it, and therefore maybe give it a better QoS or something like that. So as long as you're transparent in what you're doing, and the end user is paying for a service, the PCC architecture, like was just pointed out in some of the applications, it is the key enabler to actually do these things.
Okay, great. Well, we're approaching the top of the hour, but I've got a couple of specific questions that have been submitted by users that I want to get out of the way. First of all, slide 19, which is one of your slides, Cameron, it says, unlimited bandwidth causes network congestion, and one of the attendees asked that you explain that a bit further.
Okay, so I think this is basically elaborating on the point that the other speakers made as well, that particularly in the US, I think you're seeing a lot more that basically giving users unlimited bandwidth, it was never perceived when these sort of bundles were being offered to users that just the explosion of data would happen in the way that it did. And the result of this explosion of data is that in many cases the network is being congested. And in some cases the operators have been able to respond to that by spending more money and beefing up their infrastructure. But certainly I'm aware of other cases where it's just not possible to increase the bandwidth at the same rate due to restrictions of sort of the radio interfaces. I don't know, does that explain that well enough?
I think that's definitely a start, and perhaps it's something that we could follow up on online if that particular user still needs additional detail. Also, a quick follow-up for Ed. You mentioned short code billing. Can you just one more time go through what you really mean by that?
Sure. Real quick, obviously a short code is when we have like a 5-digit numeric code that you use essentially in place of a telephone number, and you can send a text to it, usually with a key phrase, and that key phrase is then going to trigger a download or a content subscription or some other kind of service like that. And that's the mechanism we see generally for on-deck content billing in the U.S. And it's a very limited platform in the sense that we're talking about here in terms of new business models, and that it can only offer kind of one-time subscriptions or a one-time payment. It doesn't give a lot of flexibility or awareness of sessions within sessions or more complicated tiers of service, all the kinds of things that we're starting to talk about with new services. And at the end of the day, one strong piece of evidence is that when the equipment manufacturers came out with their app stores, they didn't want to use this mechanism as their only billing channel. They wanted to go another way and give people more options for how they can pay and more flexibility in how subscriptions or payments or pricing could be developed. So that was really the point on the short code billing.
Okay. Great. Well, that brings us to the top of the hour, so I want to thank everyone who's taken part here. Cameron Dunn from OpenNet, Dennis Fiore from Cisco, and our own Ed Feingold from Pipeline. Anyone who has attended this webinar, if you're interested in downloading those slides, you should be able to do so from a button on your platform. Those should be available for download immediately. I believe they're available for download now. In addition, within the next 24 hours, we will have this entire webinar available for download on at www.pipelinepub.com, and you'll be able to hear this webinar in its entirety. Thanks very much for joining us for this KnowledgeCast webinar, and we hope to see you again next time.